Afanasy Makovnev comes from Russia with a love for whales. It's a burning passion that makes him want to plunge into icy seas, even with the most formidable predator on Earth, the awesome killer whale. A passion that has driven him far and wide just to be near them. There are few places in the world that are still truly wild. Chukotka, a frozen peninsula on Russia's far eastern frontier, is one of them. And this is where Afanasy has come in his search for whales. He's one of few adventurers with a permit to this hidden wilderness. Much of life here has never been filmed before. Whales from as far afield as Mexico and Pacific Walrus take advantage of this undisturbed place, but they draw fearsome hunters, the biggest and least known killer whales in the world. One day, Afanasy wants to swim with these mighty creatures, but he has much to learn about this place and killer whales before he can risk that.
First time I went to Chukotka, we were making a film about blue-eye huskies. That's why I came here and stayed.
It was during those first sledding expeditions that Afanasy fell in love with this largely unexplored wilderness and its whales. Chukotka is one of the most inaccessible places on Earth. It is the peninsula of land that is Russia's far northeastern corner. At the narrowest point across the Bering Strait, the distance between Russia and America is just over 85 kilometers. Afanasy has based himself in a seaport called Providenia so that he can be close to the whales. Other people were forced to move here during the Cold War. Concentrating the population, the communists hoped to control them and stop all contact with the United States. The Cold War has ended. The troops, along with administrative and financial support, have been withdrawn. Many Chukotkans struggle to obtain bare essentials. Few can afford vehicles, but people can be amazingly resourceful. The tires on this homemade Jeep are assembled from old inner tubes. Afanasy makes a living leading expeditions, guiding tourists and filmmakers. Today is a day off, and with his friend Sergei Vykovtsev, he's going after whales.
Go to Chaplin!
The Bering Sea freezes every winter, but due to strong currents, there are usually some areas of open water. It's in these Arctic lagoons that bowhead whales congregate to feed. Afanasy is on a quest to photograph these magnificent creatures. The problem is getting across the ice to the open water. There are no roads across Chukotka, so Afanasy needs help from his friends. Sergei bought an old tank from the Russian troops at the end of the Cold War. It's not particularly reliable. But Sergei never travels without a hammer. The caterpillar tracks were designed for soft terrain, not frozen scree. Breakdowns and hiccups are common, but who cares when you're on an adventure to find whales?
Ooh.
To support the tank, the ice must be over 20 centimeters thick.
We can see that the ice is quite thin.
If at first you don't succeed, find a lighter form of transport. The bowheads are out there, and Afanasi is determined to get out to them. As he heads out into the bay, the surface water becomes slushy. Further out, it's frozen solid. Smashing through the ice is no problem for walruses. They're adapted to life in freezing seas. To conserve heat, they shut down the blood supply to their extremities. The tips of their flippers turn white with cold. In Chukotka, there are no mobile phones and no public rescue services. The temperature at night can drop to -40. If Afanasi gets stuck here, he could die.
You see, we tried to go out into the sea through the slash. So the slash was all right because the boat can break it. But over there was a bit older ice, maybe 7-8 centimeters, which was really a problem for the boat. And the engine was overheating, so we had to come back.
The whales will have to wait for another day. Afanasi is disappointed, but not downhearted. He has a night out with friends to look forward to.
This is grey whale maktak.
Mahtak is raw whale skin and blubber. It may not seem very appetizing, but then caviar is raw fish eggs.
Вы уже поели, да, один раз?
Ну, я его ждала, я это самое.
Sergei is a Yupik Eskimo friend of Afanasi's from his dog racing days. Sergei has invited Afanasi on a sledding adventure, one that involves this extraordinary homemade rake.
Сейчас-то уже можно проехать.
He's sharpening his device. It's called upalovka, or upanehusek.
Тебе буду помогать. Давай, 1, 2, 3.
Так. Ну-ка. Ваня. Веня.
Не смейся, Ваня.
Ваня. Ваня, сильнее.
Да, молодец.
Sergei's dogs spend their lives outside, whatever the weather. They're fed on walrus meat that is said to keep man and beast warm. It needs to. The temperature is -20.
Поедем, Сереж?
Поедем.
Ну, поехали.
The dogs are born to run. Those left behind are not impressed. Huskies have incredible stamina and can lope for hours without tiring. The team are heading for the ice edge. They're not out to get whales, but another local delicacy. The rake is dropped through a hole in the ice. Underwater currents take it downstream as it sinks to the bottom. It's then pulled back across the seabed, where it hopefully hooks its prey. And the quarry is sea squirts. Primitive tubular animals with two siphons, one to suck water in and the other to squirt it out. There's no accounting for what people will savor. The fishermen all keep their distance so that their lines don't get snagged under the ice. Some areas are proving more lucrative than others.
Yep.
Ой-ой-ой.
While others are raking it in, success is eluding Sergei.
Добренькая, опять, наверное, капуста.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Just when Sergei's luck turns, it's time to pack it in. In an hour, it'll be dark, and the temperature is already plummeting. Now, the race is on to get home before everyone freezes. For Afanasi, the adventure isn't over. He's got work across the Bering Sea in Alaska. Although he's reluctant to leave his beloved Chukotka, this is an opportunity he cannot refuse. Especially as where he's going, he has a chance of getting really close to some whales. He's lucky enough to hitch a ride out of Providenia in an air ambulance. Although safety precautions on board seem to have gone up in smoke. Afanasi arrives in Dutch Harbor, the principal town of Alaska's Aleutian Islands, just before the main grey whale migration. The Aleutians are a string of volcanic isles that stretch over 1,600 kilometers into the Bering Sea. Dutch Harbor is the hub of a very profitable fishing industry. Providenia may be just across the water, but it might as well be a world away. Chukotka borders the Bering Sea too, but it's further north, and its waters are frozen for 6 months. Anyway, the Russians just don't have the billions needed to invest in a comparable fishing industry. While Afanasi waits for the whale's arrival, he discovers that fortunes can be made in Dutch Harbor. Even a deckhand can earn $1,000 a day. Bald eagles thrive on fish scraps. In Dutch Harbor, they're doing so well that they've become a menace, a nuisance for the residents, but a photo opportunity for Afanasi. Fishing in the Bering Sea is so lucrative that strict quotas have been enforced to ensure against overfishing. Halibut weighing over 90 kilos are not uncommon.
How many pounds were there?
There was, I don't know, we had a
While chatting with the fishermen, Afanasi learns that killer whales, or orcas, have become a big problem. He's keen to discover what's happening out at sea and manages to hitch a ride out to the fishing grounds. 10 hours later, the crew are ready to drop the lines. Shortly after starting the hydraulic winch that pulls in their catch, orcas appear.
There, a big male.
Yeah, they'll come right up next to the
Yeah,
boat
it's
here.
coming. We see his fin now. He's right near the line. Oh, there it is. There's so many of them right now.
The whales have proved that they are very smart. They can recognize individual boats and the difference between the sounds of the various hauling gear. They ignore the crabbing ships, but home in on the cod and halibut fishermen. Tim Wilkie, the captain, is frustrated, but there's little he can do.
The whales will be starting to feed on the ground line that's going down. They run down anywhere from 600 to 900 feet, I think they dive down and start picking the fish right off the hooks. So it's pretty amazing how accurate they are too. They'll clean it right up. Nothing but fish lips will come back. That's black cod. When there was about 20 or so, I don't know how many you observed, but there was at least 20 of them. And they've got a system down where the big bulls, the big males, they go farther out, dive down deeper, get the fish the deepest. And the cows and the younger ones, they're up closer to the boat because as we haul the line, it's coming off the bottom, getting closer up, and they take them fish. These whales and orcas have been doing this for, oh man, a long time now. And it just seems like it's getting worse and worse. They've got where they're training the young to do it. You know, in the old days, several, 20 years ago, they used to shoot at them, keep the whales at bay. If you were shooting at them, the whales would stay a long ways off, and you were able to get fish aboard. Of course, that's against the law. Can't do that anymore. So I don't know. There's no real deterrent at this time to stop it.
At least the migratory grey whales aren't a problem. When they first arrive in April, they must travel through one of two passes. This is False Pass, the first and narrowest. Grey whales spend the winter in warm Mexican waters. About 20,000 migrate up the coast of America to spend the summer feeding off the shores of Alaska or Chukotka. The whales are the lure that enticed Afanasi to the Aleutians, but he's also been employed by a film crew. He'll help them sail to Providenia and sort out their entry permits once they get there. It's a golden opportunity to follow the whales as they migrate to Chukotka, but there is a danger element. The crew celebrate before setting sail to wish themselves luck.
Champagne for breakfast. Yeah, why not?
Открывай.
Trick is to turn the bottle apparently and not to turn the cork, and then it goes. Whoa!
The currents in False Pass are strong. Many ships have been wrecked here, so the crew wait to sail with the tide out to the open ocean in the path of the whales. Afanasi's journey starts in Dutch Harbour. continues through False Pass before following the course of the grey whales across the Bering Sea to Russia.
Yes, it's front. Port side, port side.
The Bering Sea is one of the most treacherous stretches of water on Earth. These waters are supercooled, unpredictable, and often violent. If the seas are calm, it will take the crew 4 days to reach Chukotka, sailing non-stop. Afanasi has just finished a long shift and is asleep as they hit a patch of exciting weather.
It's a bit lumpy today, and now I can't see out of this side because I've got hail in it. So things are going well.
By the time Afanasi surfaces, the waves have subsided, the Russian coast is in sight, and they've encountered whales. The dorsal fins of male killer whales in these waters can reach heights of nearly 2 meters. The fins of both these males have flopped. It's likely that they have a genetic defect, rather than their fins have collapsed.
Oh, he got some rope. I see this orca has, it looks like it's just a piece of rope hooked on his fin. No, we don't have to worry about him.
The crew are nearly at their destination. Providenia is within sight.
This is my home. Providenia.
Providenia contrasts sharply with wealthy Dutch harbour. But there are unexpected riches in these Russian waters. Even the harbour teems with life.
Saw his flippers. I already saw his flippers.
Arctic cod live and even breed under the ice during the winter. They occur in their millions, and although only a few centimetres long, they are the mainstay of many marine mammals. A bearded seal is able to replace the fat it lost during the long cold months.
Cold bucket.
Here comes the fish.
Afanasi is an accomplished cook, and before leaving the yacht, he treats the crew with a Chukotkan version of whitebait. After only a few days' rest, the irrepressible Afanasi heads northwest, because there are whales up there, of course. In July, it never gets dark in northern Russia. The continuous daylight triggers an explosion of planktonic life. Grey whales swim 11,000 kilometers every year to feast on the billions of tiny creatures that teem in the silty seabed off the Chukotkan coast. It's one of the longest migrations known for a mammal. These whales feed predominantly on amphipods, small crustaceans about the size of a housefly. They gulp great mouthfuls of mud. As they force it through their sieve-like baleen plates, the crustaceans are trapped inside their mouths. Their mud trails are easily visible from the air. One of the whale's favorite feeding grounds is close to the village of Enmelin. It's no coincidence that these Yupik Eskimos and Chukchi people settled here. They hunt marine mammals. They have to. There's precious little else to eat. Through a mutual love of huskies, Afanasi made lots of friends during his sledding days. Training doesn't stop due to a lack of snow, especially now there's the beach to exercise on. And it's to the beach that most of the community are now going. It's no surprise that during the short summer, the kids run wild. They've been cooped up indoors all winter. This young grey whale was obviously killed by killer whales. They attack from below, ripping out their victim's tongue. Often, that's all they'll eat. The killer whale's teeth inflicted these slashes, testament to their deadly power. These villagers are allowed to hunt 3 greys a year. Finding one killed by killer whales is a welcome bonus. Food is very hard to come by in this frigid northern land. It's too cold to grow fruit and vegetables. Apart from being given a limited supply of flour by the state, these people rely on the sea for supplies. Whale blubber is so nutritious, everyone scrambles for their fair share. Maktak is the skin and first few centimeters of blubber. The underlying fat is cut off and discarded. These people live very much as their ancestors have done for centuries. There is a strong community allegiance. There needs to be, if they are to survive. Enough food must be accumulated during the short summer to see them through the long, bitter winter. Meat is stored in ice houses. 2 meters below ground, the permafrost keeps everything frozen.
This is real ice here. It's really cold. These are the jars with wild onions collected from tundra. Not much meat here, but he'll bring some later. This is beautiful.
Northwest of Enmelin, a gravel spit projects into the sea. The far end is a favourite walrus haul-out. Afanasi has long wanted to visit the site, and this year he has been granted the necessary permits. He's keen to take photographs, especially as this colony of Pacific walrus is exceptional, in that it contains both sexes and youngsters. At times, 15,000 animals can congregate at this site. While some lounge on the haul-out, others feed in the shallows. They root about the seabed like pigs looking for truffles. Using the sensitive bristles on their muzzles, they feel for clams. An adult needs 45 kilos of food a day. This amounts to a daily ration of 10,000 small clams. They can eat almost continuously for a week before returning to the beach to rest for a day or two. During feeding, blood is pumped from the blubber to internal organs to maintain core body temperature. When the animals emerge, the skin appears bleached and bloodless. As they heat up sunbathing, the blood flows back to their skin and they soon regain their rosy color. Pacific walrus are not endangered, but hunting them is illegal except for native people. The Enmelin villagers aim to hunt around 200 every year, but they rarely reach this number. It isn't often that the sea is calm enough or the walrus close enough to go hunting. These days, they use rifles as well as harpoons. All the boys here want to be hunters. Men with a sure aim are well respected. Even with guns and outboard motors, hunting isn't easy. The marksmen don't like to admit just how many get away. These people have hunted walrus for centuries. They are a vital food supply. they use every portion of the animal, from hides for rugs to whiskers for toothpicks. The ivory makes implements and objets d'art, the sinews make thread, and the meat provides food for humans and dogs. In Enmelin, they bone some of the carcasses, fold them over, and sew them up to make great bags of meat. The rope is made from washed-up nets and lines lost at sea by Aleutian fishing boats. Nothing goes to waste here. The meat bags are stockpiled for the lean winter months in the community storage house. By the time it's eaten, the flesh will have fermented, rather like well-hung beef. The locals say it's strong, but delicious. Life has been hard for these villagers. During the Cold War, the communists controlled rural communities by giving people paid state jobs. Native skills were discouraged and many were lost. Now, in a U-turn, the government no longer wants responsibility for Chukotka. The only choice for the native people has been to relearn a traditional way of life. Apart from man and polar bears, walrus have only one other enemy. These two huge adult male killer whales are regularly seen hunting walrus each summer. Newborn babies are most at risk. The adult males carry them on their backs in an attempt to keep them safe. The whales isolate one group. The others flee for shore. Adult walrus will use their tusks in self-defense. The killer whale's aim is to panic their prey and force them to dive repeatedly. As the walrus surface, desperate for air, their predators try to knock one senseless with their tails. It's one way of avoiding injury from lethal tusks. Whales benefit from a remarkable level of coordination and teamwork. It's only a matter of time before their tactics succeed. Afanasi has been offered the chance to dive with killer whales. It may seem totally insane, but it's an opportunity of a lifetime, and one he just can't refuse. Afanasi's dream is to swim with killer whales. He can't do this in his native waters because he thinks Russia's whales are all mammal hunters. But he can try to achieve his goal in Norway. The whales that congregate in Norwegian fjords every October are fish eaters. They're here to take advantage of the annual herring run. Afanasi's with marine biologist Anna Bistha, who's been studying Norway's whales for 10 years. Scientists have been reporting a recent trend for the herring to stay out at sea, where it's impossible to find the shoals and their attendant whales. This might be the last year the orcas come to feed in the fjords, and it may be Afanasi's last chance to get really close to them. Anna has no trouble finding her favorite study group, although it's almost as if the whales have come to find her.
Unusual day, very unusual, really calm. They're friendly, they're playful. That's incredible.
This group of 16 whales is well known to Anna. She calls them NP pod, and knows that when they're feeding on herring, they are approachable, even underwater.
They're right here and going in the water.
Scandinavian sagas tell of fearsome red whales. These orcas could be descendants of the same beasts that Nordic seamen were so afraid of. This is not an outing for the faint-hearted. When the orcas find a shoal of herring, they circle the fish, corralling them into a tight ball. The whales use their white bellies to drive the herring towards the surface and stop them escaping into deep water. They use bubbles to keep the fish tightly bunched. Finally, they whack the herring ball with their tails to stun their prey. Then the dazed fish can be picked off one by one at the predator's leisure.
was great! Yeah. Unbelievable! Wow! Couldn't believe it! There are so many coming from here, turning around, looking at me.
Yeah?
Great! Oh, unbelievable! Ah. I want more. I want to come really close and touch it. Yeah. If you were looking at me from the depth, and then one orca was spy hopping, and I did the same. We looked at each other and dived again. Doesn't seem like they're really interested in me.
But Afanasi couldn't be more wrong. Afanasi can search for whales all of his life, but this is one experience he will always marvel at. For whale lovers, it just doesn't get much better than this.
It was great! Unbelievable!
Afanasi's dream is to share his experiences with Russian scientists so that they can study their whales. He thinks it would be fantastic if Russian researchers could exchange ideas with whale experts around the world so that everyone, and the animals too, can benefit.
They're incredible animals. Really are.
You are about to witness the death of a leviathan. This century, 2 million whales have been killed by man for his own commercial gain. This is the story of the greatest creatures the world has ever known, and the story of one man's fight to learn their secrets. The man, Dr. Roger Payne. His passion and his life work, the whale.
If you're a small animal, you lead a frantic, frightened life. To a mosquito, a raindrop must seem like a tidal wave. But if you're a whale, all but the grandest things must pass beneath your notice. As the largest animal, including the dinosaurs, that has ever lived on Earth, you can afford to be gentle and to view life without fear. It is this sense of tranquility, life without urgency, power without aggression, that has completely won my heart to whales.
The Psalms describe the whale as that leviathan whom God has made to take his pastime in the oceans. Today, mankind is putting an end not only to the pastimes, but to the very presence in our oceans of the great Leviathan himself. On a lonely beach in the Argentine, surrounded by elephant seals, Roger Payne pursues a study that has made him one of the world's leading scientific experts on whales. A passionate defender of these rare giants, he helped persuade the US government to put a total ban on the import of whale products. How does a man set about studying a subject as remote and immense as a 60-foot whale? A creature which, like an iceberg, is mainly underwater. The link in Payne's case was acoustics, including the strange noises, often inaudible to human ears, by which many creatures communicate or hunt. For his work on how owls find their prey in total darkness, Roger Payne received a doctorate at Cornell University. One night, he was working in his laboratory at Tufts University on how moths detect the sonic pings of hunting bats and avoid capture, when the local radio announced that the body of a small whale, it turned out to be a dolphin, had been washed ashore nearby. For some reason he still can't explain, he set out into the wet night for the seashore.
All the way along the beach, I just couldn't wait to get a look at that whale. I'd never seen one up close, and I felt irresistibly drawn to it. When I finally reached it, I was to see that what had happened was pretty typical of what happens to any whale when it encounters man. Two people had carved their initials in the body, and someone else had rammed a cigar butt in the blowhole. Standing there, looking at its lovely, subtle curves, glistening in the cold rain, I decided to try to learn enough about whales to have some influence on their fate.
Roger Payne began his whale study in Bermuda with research on whale sounds. Small sailing boats became his seagoing recording studios. He chose Bermuda because a small band of humpback whales gathers offshore there every April. Payne had heard some recordings of humpback sounds made by an old friend, Frank Watlington. Now he meant to learn the nature and meaning of those sounds. Perhaps the main force that drove him was the thought of that mutilated carcass on the beach. Never far from his mind was the history of persecution the whale has suffered at the hands of man.
People think of the height of the whale slaughter as being at the end of the last century, when the New England whalers pursued the sperm whale in sailboats, not much bigger and certainly not as fast as this sloop. The greatest 10-year kill that has ever been made was between 1960 and 1970. At least in the old days, whales had some chance of getting back at their tormentors.
Off Bermuda, Roger sought out his whales in much the same fashion as the old-time Nantucket and New Bedford whalers, searching from a masthead while under full sail. As the New England whalers killed off the right and sperm whales in the North Atlantic, bigger ships were needed to make longer voyages. Even so, a 3-year voyage in the 1890s only killed about 37 whales, 1 whale a month. In the 1960s, catches averaged 30 times as much, between 1 and 2 whales a day. Even in the early 1900s, as this rare early whaling film and Hollywood reconstruction show, methods were still extremely crude. Modern whalers had to be faster and bigger, simply because whales became harder and harder to find. The harpoon had a charge that went off like a bomb inside the whale. As a result of public outrage and the Save the Whale campaign started in the 1970s, whaling is now 1% of what it was then when these pictures were taken. But there are new dangers today. Drift netting may be killing more whales and porpoises than whaling ever did. However, the major threat now is probably from the toxic substances that man dumps into the sea, which may represent the total undoing not just of the whales, but all marine mammals. But let's return to Roger Payne's research work. His Bermuda whale hunt ended in a quite different and peaceful way. He was able to sail right among the humpbacks and record their sounds with an underwater microphone.
For hours at a time, my wife Katie and I sailed in the company of whales or their songs. I think there is nothing that has happened to me that can compare with those days. Rocking gently in a boat with those sounds flooding up out of the sea is like no other experience.
In 1970, those songs reached a wider public on a best-selling record that became a cult, especially with young people. It had a strange effect, deeply touching the emotions, as if it spoke of life's sea origins long forgotten. The Paynes analyzed the sounds by means of a machine called a spectrograph. It was Katie who, after several seasons' research, discovered that the songs were different each year. The whales were adding or changing phrases each season, as if to say, this is our song for this year. Before the noise of ships' propellers interfered with certain wavelengths, some whales, at least, might have heard their own kind calling over a distance of several thousand miles. Today's range is limited to about 500 miles. Most of the ocean, especially the once whale-populated Antarctic Ocean, is silent, because these lonely wastes are practically empty of whales. There are so few whales left in the world. Where could Roger Payne find a place where he could study numbers of whales close to shore? The answer was here, Peninsula Valdes in Patagonia. The dark patches in this space photograph show the two bays that attract the whales to Peninsula Valdes, large, safe, and virtually landlocked. A sea paradise where life happens with serenity and elemental power. The whales which arrive off Valdes each May and stay until December are different from those whose songs Roger Payne studied off Bermuda. They're southern right whales. The old whalers gave them that name because they were the right whales to hunt. At this time of year, their natural home is the surf, and the females come close into the shore. Today, right whales are finally protected as a result of the pressure of public opinion and the ruling of the International Whaling Commission. It was in 1970 that Roger Payne, then working for the New York Zoological Society, made his first exploratory trip to Valdes.
That first afternoon, strolling along the beach among the elephant seals, with the whales 30 yards out, I could hardly believe I was alive. For a moment there, I honestly thought I'd died and gone to heaven. It was perhaps the nicest afternoon I'll ever spend. That first trip, Katie and I spent only a month at Valdes. It was enough to tell me that here was the place to get to know and understand something of the mysterious ways of the right whale. It was cold and windy, and we lived in a small tent with elephant seals for company. They make good company. The whales were so close that I often felt I could touch them. At the end of the month, I came away with a distinct feeling that I'd been living in paradise.
The following August, Roger returned to Valdes to start his study in earnest, this time with additional help from the National Geographic Society. Katie Payne readily agreed to taking the 4 children out of school for 3 months. They could always catch up on lessons later. The Paynes decided that the adventurous life they were about to share would be a greater educational experience. Sam is the youngest. He was then 7. Then there was Holly, 9. Laura, 8. And John, 11. And somehow, fairly chaotically, that first camp on the bleak and windy foreshore of Valdes got set up. That first year, Roger did a good deal of his close observation of whales from rubber boats, often taking the family with him.
All our other experiences indicated that there's little likelihood of being harmed by whales. They're like cows, really, and seem to me the most beguiling and gentle creatures on Earth. I'm sure they're far too alert to overlook a boat in their vicinity. So I felt little concern that a whale might crush a boat when it's breaching. That's leaping from the water. With the children aboard, I tried to stay wide of whales that were playing boisterously. And believe me, whales can play boisterously, especially large calves who are clumsy and fearless oafs, something that wouldn't worry me if they weren't bigger than elephants.
Gradually, on these early boat trips, Roger began to piece together a picture of the creature he was studying, the southern right whale. The southern right whale is, to put it mildly, a very peculiar-looking animal. Its staggering size, for one thing. The right whale is one of the largest of the 10 species of great whales, and a big one can reach 60 feet in length. That's the mouth, the line of the jaws curved like a flamingo's beak. The white patches are called callosities. Coarse hairs grow among them. The callosities are often mistaken for barnacles.
When you see a whale really close, and you wouldn't want to get much closer than this, it's the breadth of the back that's impressive. An adult right whale's back can be 15 feet across. It looks like a submerged reef or the bottom of a capsized steamer. On a big whale, the tail flukes are well over 20 feet across. And a single pectoral fin stands 9 feet out of the water. People sometimes forget that whales are air-breathing mammals. Well, here are the gigantic nostrils, the blowholes to prove it. The weight of an adult is often around 65 tons. And 65 tons, suddenly dumped in the ocean, makes quite a splash. Head on, the animal looks a bit like a nuclear submarine, minus its conning tower. Color varies quite a bit. Remember Moby Dick and Captain Ahab's search for the white whale? Well, here's a whale we've known for 4 years, a right whale that is nearly a white whale. He was snow white at birth. The trouble is, no matter how much you watch whales from the surface, you seldom get a sense of what the whole animal looks like. Except when breaching, almost nothing shows.
Part of Katie Payne's work at Valdes was building up an identification system for all the whales that called in at the bay each year. She did this mostly with photographs, but she also painted some of the whales. Katie's artwork gives an excellent idea of what a southern right whale looks like when all the component parts, only glimpsed from the surface, are put together. This is a whale looking straight ahead. To do this, he must raise his head because the eyes are sighted low down under that bulge. This sketch shows just how much whale remains hidden when the animal is lying near the surface. There's that downward-looking eye again, with the curve of the lower jaw shown clearly by its grey colouring. And from a gull's eye view, callosities, jaws and blowhole with bubbles streaking back as a calf turns to keep station with its mother. In their second season at Valdes, the Paynes were ready for more detailed study. They built a cliff-top hut because tents had proved useless for working in the howling Patagonian wind. And the Paynes were beginning to get worried about disturbance to the whales caused by continuous use of a boat. From their windproof hut, they could observe, record and photograph. As they worked, the underwater microphones, or hydrophones, anchored in the bay constantly filled the hut with whale sounds. But the great thing about the cliff-top hut was that the whales came so close inshore. Using telephoto lenses, identification dossiers were built up on over 1,000 individuals. The white markings on head and jaws are different in every single whale, as distinctive as a man's fingerprints. They change slightly as the whale grows older, but retain the same basic, highly individual patterns. By checking the face patterns of whales as they arrive in the bay against the photographs, the Paynes soon established that many of the same whales return to Valdes year after year, mothers often bringing very young calves with them and sometimes giving birth in the shallow waters of the bay. From the high incidence of calves, Roger Payne began to think that the main attraction of the Valdes Peninsula was the shelter it gave to the youngsters. Some research couldn't be done from the hut. For instance, measuring whales that didn't come close to the cliffs. This had to be tackled from the air, though not from the air alone. Roger invented his own special technique. If he could take an aerial photograph of a whale alongside an object of known size, then by comparing the two, he could calculate the whale's size. The known object was a circular white disc, 1 meter in diameter, mounted on the bow of a rubber boat. All the boat had to do, directed by radio from the plane, was to get in the picture with the selected whale. Often these smaller members of the whale family, called Fitzroy's dolphins, accompanied the boat apparently just for the fun of it. This time it's the white whale who unsuspectingly is posing for his aerial portrait. When the pictures are developed, it's a simple matter to measure how many times the 1 meter disc goes into the whale's length. That makes the white whale over 20 feet long, not yet half grown. Besides taking aerial photographs, Roger was sometimes able to enjoy the sheer beauty of whales in a playful mood. But as Roger was to discover, whales don't leap like this just for joy. There's a purpose behind these great plumes of spray. By 1974, the pains had multiplied man's knowledge of the behavior of the great whales many times. They now had an established camp. But there was nothing else at Valdes, no entertainment, and certainly no school. The 4 Payne children had missed up to 4 months' school in each year. Roger and Katie made them keep up with their studies, but entertainment was something the children had to devise for themselves. All the evidence suggests that they were very good at it. Mouse racing in specially cut tracks in the dunes is a communal sport. The children stuck closely together, and this has lasted into adulthood, probably as a result of the Valdes experience. Sam was greatly attached to a tame gull called Lancelot. Naturally enough, the children were strong on animal-human relationships. Netting fish to feed the gull was something they were all willing to cooperate on. In a very cold sea, Sam got assistance on the seine net from John and Holly. Not all their friendships were with wild animals. The children rode bareback a great deal on a very large Argentine grey called Tordijo. The children had to be almost as at home in the sea as the whale calves themselves. The right whales didn't represent a danger to the children, but the parents had to keep an eye out for their relatives, the killer whales, and for sharks. Before he came down to Valdes, John had chosen as a school project a natural history subject. You might have expected it would have been whales, which are always in view from his cliff-top observation post. But while John and the other children were always ready to help their parents in their whale studies, his own chosen subject was hawks and their soaring and hunting behavior along the cliff tops of Valdes, where he spent days alone, watching them. The children had much of their parents' patience when it came to studying and observing animals. This shy little creature is a cuisse, a relative of the guinea pig that lived around the Paynes camp. They're not easily tamed, but Laura and Sam willingly put in hours getting the cuisse used to human presence. This rapport with wild animals, large and small, is one of the things that Roger and Katie Payne believe will have compensated their children for the isolation of Valdes. Possibly the best thing the parents and children got from the whale study was a tremendous sense of family unity. Unity not only within the group, but with their environment as a whole. It was hard not to feel this harmony with whales continually blowing and calling in the background, even during breakfast. Roger and Katie felt that their children would catch up on any formal learning they'd missed once the Valdes study had ended. And later, all of them completed university degrees. What Valdes gave them was something taught in no school or university on Earth. Monsters are part of Halloween celebrations. So what other monster could the Payne family have possibly chosen? In case you don't recognize it, it is a Basilosaurus, an extinct ancestor of the right whale, complete with blowhole and tail flukes.
What a monster!
So the strangest whale ever seen on the coast of Patagonia approached the Payne's camp and collapsed on the sand.
It died!
One day, a strange new apparition appeared on the beach at Valdes. A truck bumped down the rutted track between the dunes at the end of a rough 600-mile ride from Buenos Aires. The load it carried had been christened the Monster by cameraman Des Bartlett, who helped design it. The Monster was the joint brainchild of Roger Payne and Des Bartlett. If it looks like the conning tower of a submarine, that's because this is more or less what it is. In fact, it's a large tank equipped with a hatch and watertight windows designed for underwater whale observation. From the very moment of its arrival, the whales turned up to observe it. A pair swam close inshore as the 3-ton monster was painstakingly unloaded. Launching a submarine is easy compared with launching a submersible, or anyway, this submersible. As captain of this strange craft, Roger made a careful inspection of his floating, or possibly sinking, command. The expressions on the faces of his launching crew, including the truck driver and Katie, unmistakably say, "God bless all who sail in her, and thank God it won't be me." Getting the 3-ton monster off the truck and down the beach took the best part of 5 days. Then all they had to do was to wait for the tide to come in. But first for the final fitting out. They hoped that the whales would grow used to the monster so that they could observe them behaving naturally through special watertight windows. The windows were made of curved plastic to avoid distortion. Now Roger had to wait, like King Canute, for the tide to come in. In an hour or two, he'd know whether the calculations were correct and whether the 2 tons of lead ballast loaded aboard were sufficient to keep the monster on an even keel. At last, tidal liftoff was achieved. Katie and graduate student Bernd Versig towed the weird-looking craft out into the bay. Throughout this phase, the whales kept a close watch on the proceedings. Roger descended for his first waterline view of one monster from another. From the half-submerged window, only the rubber boat showed up. But the top window gave him a magnificent view of a curious whale.
I wasn't surprised that the whales showed such interest in the monster. They had systematically destroyed or set adrift everything we ever moored in the bay. Hydrophones, boats, buoys, tide gauges, the lot. Now, from the lower window, I could see this one was really interested in his new toy. First, he moved in close and sat quietly for a long while, thinking it over, I suppose. The rubber boat was still standing by. He then began making slow passes, getting braver and bolder and closer and more excited with every pass. I called Katie on the walkie-talkie to tell her to launch a rescue party for the monster and that I was about to bail out. I was confident this whale didn't mean to be aggressive, but the hatch, which was still open, took 10 minutes to close and it hadn't been tested and found watertight. I untied the rubber boat and shoved off, only just in time as it happened. One whale caught its fin around the anchor rope and took the 3-ton monster, plus its anchor, a 55-gallon drum filled with concrete, for a ride.
Amazingly, the monster stayed afloat. But it's just as well Roger abandoned ship. If it had filled, it would have sunk like a stone, taking its captain with it. Whales may be gentle, but they're awfully big. And as Roger's studies were beginning to confirm, they can be careless and play a little rough. For 4 long years, the Paynes followed the day-to-day life of the Valdes whales. Gradually, an intimate portrait of their behavior has emerged. How whales relate to one another, how they communicate, their forms of play and their forms of competition, the things that interest them and the things that don't. The studies have opened up an entirely new world of knowledge about these gentle giants. For example, an observation about one of the whale's most familiar aspects, its spout. When a whale blows, the vapor cloud isn't just condensed moisture from the air in its lungs, but surface water trapped in the trough round its blowholes. This is suddenly atomized by the whale violently breathing out. Another thing Roger learnt was that whales have a highly developed sense of play, which takes many forms. Breaching, that is arching out of the water and crashing back, is one of their most frequent activities. It's also a means of communication, especially in rough weather when breaching is a noisy activity. So when the wind comes up and the roar of waves drowns out their calls, they resort to breaching, apparently to maintain contact with each other. Seen from the air, an adult whale breaching produces about the same disturbance as a pattern of depth charges. Another form of communication, lobtailing, slamming the tail down on the water. The whales use this to tell each other where they are. Often a whale will crack its tail down 30 or more times. Some of these blows produce a deafening crash that can be heard 5 miles away. One of the discoveries that most delighted Roger was that whales can sail. In a light wind, they stand on their heads, holding their tail flukes at right angles to the wind, and are driven ponderously along. As far as anyone knows, they're the only mammals, except man, that consciously use the wind to travel without effort. This whale isn't sailing. It's a female successfully avoiding an ardent male who's swimming around frustrated beneath her. As long as she keeps this attitude, he can't do anything about it. The strategy only fails when her tail sinks beneath the surface. So she quickly recovers her position using flippers to hoist her tail into the air again. She's lifting at least 15 tons. Females often keep this up for hours at a time. Roger has found that whales are completely tolerant of other marine creatures, including sea lions, which often play around them. Probably this is because they have no one to fear, except the carnivorous killer whales, which he believes may occasionally prey on small whale calves. He finds young sea lions are incapable of passing a mother whale with calf without turning back to play in the wash from its tail. And dolphins ride on a whale's bow wave. The whales often lie with their backs out of water so long that their skin burns in the sun. The gulls not only walk around on them, but feed on the peeling skin. They have now learned to remove chunks of live flesh as well, which irritates the whales so much that it sometimes drives them away. Whales are one of the comparatively few species, like man, that mate all the year round. At Valdes, the principal social activity is courtship and mating. Up to 7 males compete for the same female, but they may cooperate, helping each other by pushing the female underwater so that one of them may mate with her. But they also fight, rubbing their hard, rough callosities on their opponents' backs. The callosities act rather like the antlers of a stag. A whale's skin is extremely thin, so that even a light rub may in fact cause enough pain to dissuade rivals. There's gentleness too. An amorous male strokes a female's back with his flipper. These courtship sessions go on for hours, even days. They're often accompanied by a weird series of sounds. In matters of love, whales might truly be called warm-blooded. Their body temperature is about the same as ours. They become sexually mature at about the same age, and like us, they may live for roughly the biblical 70 years and 10. Calf cruises alongside its mother as if she were a tanker from which it is refueling. At Valdes, one of the most endearing things the Paynes observed was the bond between mothers and calves. This calf is probably just under a year old. Like most youngsters, he wants his mother to nurse him. He rears out of the water and thumps his 10-ton weight down on his mother's back. His mother puts up with it for a while and then dives, giving him a cautionary slap with her tail flukes in the process. He takes the hint and next time breaches on his own. Finally, he swims up alongside to nuzzle her. For the first time, thanks to Des Bartlett's camera, Roger Payne has been able to get intimate close-up underwater studies of his beloved right whales. Like something out of a Jules Verne fantasy, a 50-footer passes within feet of the camera. The sea off Valdes is like soup, making underwater photography exceedingly difficult. It's clouded with the minute plankton on which these huge creatures live. They strain the tiny animal and vegetable organisms from the water by means of baleen or whalebone filters in their mouths. Bartlett's camera hovers feet above the blowhole of a female whale well known to the Paynes. A jaw partly opens, but not to swallow the cameraman like Jonah. The camera boat has awakened it, and the whale is simply yawning. Its intentions appear entirely peaceful. The cameraman runs the very real risk of being knocked unconscious or having his skull fractured by a blow from the tail flukes as the great body brushes by him. Almost totally hidden beneath a beetling eyebrow of white, a close-up of that small eye. And here's one of the rarest shots of a whale ever taken. You're looking right down its throat as it feeds with its mouth wide open. A mouth so huge a man could stand upright inside it. The little red eye watches the camera without alarm. In his wetsuit, the cameraman probably looks very much like a seal. The whale passes mysteriously into the murk. The tail, which can drive it at all of 12 miles per hour underwater, gently propelling it along. They arrive at Valdes in May. They leave in December. Their subsequent journeys are only partly known, but Roger Payne does know that they go north to the coast of Brazil and also southeast into the empty mid-Atlantic waters near South Georgia, one of the main whale areas in the South Atlantic. As the whales leave Valdes, they face a voyage of thousands of miles. Roger is left behind to wonder at their fate. People sometimes ask, of what use are whales to man? To Roger Payne, the question is presumptuous. It assumes that whales should exist solely for our use. A more suitable question might be, what use is man to whales? Payne feels we must learn something from the last dying agonies of the whaling industry. We must learn that it is as wrong to assume the Earth revolves around man as it was to assume the sun revolved around the Earth. In the Antarctic, the once vast herds of whales are gone. They died because we saw them only as an industrial resource and failed to realize their other qualities. qualities which they, as the real masters of the oceans, might someday teach us. Most countries have accepted the recommendations of the International Whaling Commission and ceased hunting for the time being. But there are still 2 countries, Japan and Norway, that continue to slaughter them, 300 this year, for so-called scientific purposes. While the right whales and many other species are now reasonably well protected, their long-term survival is by no means guaranteed. The temptations of financial rewards are not dead, only dormant.
That massive symbol of greed, the whaling industry, is not only shooting whales out of business, but itself as well. Look at this thriving whaling station in the Antarctic before the First World War. Look at it now. All that leaping, spouting, singing host of whales traded for a pile of scrap metal. What an ignominious end for such a fantastic creature, and what a waste.
To Roger Payne, there is no question. The sea must be made safe for whales, so that once again the triumphant words of the creation can echo their joyful message across the oceans of the earth. And God created great whales, and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind. And God saw that it was good, and God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the sea.
In the clear waters off Hawaii, a 40-foot whale plays tag with a diver. It's a humpback, the whale that is sometimes called the winged whale because it seems to fly underwater on its huge flippers. It is also known as the singing whale. And here in the warm tropical seas, it sings its unique and mysterious song. The humpback whale is almost certainly one of the most intelligent animals in the world. Once humpbacks populated every ocean and sang their songs through all 4 quadrants of the sea. Today, because of man's greed, the song of the humpback may not echo for much longer throughout the vastness of the ocean. Less than 100 years ago, the humpback whale sported and spouted in all the oceans of the world. It's a slow-moving whale that tends to keep close inshore, an easy target for the whaling industry. By 1966, when the humpbacks were given protection, the harpooners had shot the world population down to only 4,000 animals. Despite protection, the humpback still ranks as an endangered species and may yet become extinct. Today, there are only isolated populations of humpbacks left, and they're largely in the Pacific. One of the main concentrations arrives annually off the principal islands of the Hawaiian chain. In November, the first humpbacks appear off the islands of Molokai, Lanai, and Maui. It's thought they come here to calve and mate. The population builds up slowly to about 400. The whales congregate in the sheltered waters off the old whaling town of Lahaina. In the 1850s, Lahaina roadstead would have been forested with the masts of whaling ships that ranged as far north as the Bering Sea and as far south as the Antarctic ice. This quite insignificant Hawaiian settlement became the wild and sinful whaling capital of the Pacific, a sort of Dodge City by the sea. Today, the whales are again the center of Lahaina's prosperity, but in a quite different way. Lahaina has become a mecca for the increasing numbers of people who care about whales and the threat to their continued existence. Everything in the town has once more become whale-oriented. Thousands of visitors arrive each year to observe or just to catch a glimpse of the humpbacks offshore. This old whaling brig being restored as a museum is a reminder of the bad old days. The flag flying at her stern is, given international good management and goodwill, an emblem of the better days that may come. Today, a new kind of whaling ship patrols the waters off Lahaina. The Easy Rider carries members of a scientific research project along with our camera crew. From the moment she began to patrol Lahaina Sound in search of humpbacks, she enjoyed an escort of their smaller relatives, the Pacific bottlenose dolphins. Aboard her were the world's leading experts on the songs of the humpback whale, Katie Payne and her husband Roger. The Paynes have been studying the singing whale for years, mainly off Bermuda. Most of the Paynes' research has been done by surface observation and underwater recordings. Now, with a crack underwater camera team, at last they had the opportunity, literally, to probe deeper. The team was headed by Al Giddings, one of the world's most expert divers and underwater cameramen. The second underwater camera was handled by veteran Chuck Nicklin. Dr. Sylvia Earle, accomplished scuba diver and leading American woman marine biologist, completed the scientific party. The trouble about a whale is that it's like an iceberg. Most of it lies beneath the surface. The advantage of Lahaina Sound as a study area was that the water is so beautifully clear. For the first time, the scientists would be able to dive and swim with the great animals to study their behavior, while the camera team recorded it on film. To observe the whale as no scientist had seen it before was the first objective of the expedition. The second was to learn more about how and why the humpback whale sings its mysterious song. So now, an underwater microphone snakes downward to record one of the world's most uncanny and emotive sounds. The song of the humpback whale is immensely powerful. The entire song can travel up to 5 miles underwater, and the deep bass notes can be heard 50 miles away. Amazingly, the whales sing their songs without benefit of vocal cords, simply by moving masses of air within their bodies. It's like singing an operatic aria while holding your breath. As Sylvia Earle and Peter Tyack, Roger Payne's research assistant, were soon to learn, when a humpback sings, it lies almost motionless in the water. That means that these two whales beneath their boat are not the singers they're recording. They're far too active. The song comes from somewhere far in the background. waters off Lahaina are particularly clear, without the clouds of plankton on which the whales feed. So the question arises, what do these 40-ton giants feed on when they come to Hawaii? The amazing answer is, they don't seem to feed on anything. As far as anyone can tell, they go without any food whatsoever for a period of 4 or 5 months. The whales proved very approachable on the surface, but underwater turned out to be a different matter. At first, the team used big air tanks because they gave the best diving capability. But large air tanks produce a good deal of underwater noise, as well as a long stream of bubbles when the diver exhales. Though some remarkable scenes were obtained, like this shot of a pregnant female, the whales tended to fade away, even beyond the 300 feet camera range that was possible in the clear water. Normally, whales only blow at the surface. Sometimes the humpbacks produced underwater bubbles, usually when crowded by another whale. But the divers wondered whether their own bubbles weren't contributing to a stress situation. And the last thing they wanted to do was to disturb the whale's serene underwater world. This shot gives an idea of a whale's size. Diver Sylvia Earle weighs 104 pounds. The whale is closer to 80,000 pounds. The whales were utterly peaceful, even lifting their giant flippers carefully to avoid striking the divers. Sylvia Earle once lived for 2 weeks on the seabed in a pressurized home with 5 other aquanauts. Swimming with the whale, she said, surpassed anything she'd ever experienced in a long underwater career. Often she felt the whales were watching her. At times they appeared intensely curious. This is a well-grown calf playing just above its mother. The whale's song haunted them every time they dived. Sometimes it was an almost unbearable physical assault of sound and pressure, not only on the eardrums but on their entire bodies. The sensation is similar to standing near the deep bass pipes of a cathedral organ. Both Roger and Katie Payne are convinced that breaking the code of the humpback song will prove an important step towards understanding the animal's undoubted intelligence. The team decided to try a somewhat light-hearted experiment in Lahaina Sound. An underwater speaker was lowered to play back the whale songs they had already recorded. They maneuvered the rubber boats close to whales on the surface. Then Chuck Nicklin and Sylvia Earle went down to see what happened when the whales heard a mechanical reproduction of their own song. Would they react in any way? The whales weren't scared by the playback. On the other hand, they weren't attracted either. Perhaps the best description is that they were indifferent. No one was really surprised. There was no way that such a tiny speaker could reproduce the booming low tones of the whale song. Fortunately, the pained study of the song at the surface was proving more fruitful. Based on a study of 20 years of recording, Katie and Roger had carefully started to unravel the subtle and complicated rules of whale song composition. For example, they discovered that the humpbacks of Hawaii sang a quite different song from the humpbacks of Bermuda, although obeying the same general musical rules. Throughout each singing season, all whales in a given population sing the same song, but the singers are constantly altering that song. At the end of the singing season, they go off to feed and do not sing a note for months on end. But when they start singing once again, they pick up precisely where they left off many months before. In other words, humpbacks have phenomenal memories. For some time past, Katie had been patiently comparing the songs of different years and unraveling the clues that give rise to this theory. Roger transcribes the song just as if writing down music, which in a way he is. Although each whale sings its own version of this year's hit song, and the song changes gradually, each singer uses the same overall structure. Katie uses a poetic comparison to describe the phenomenon. She says it is as if all the whales agree this year to use the sonnet form. Next year, the form may be different. The colored bands on Katie's charts reflect the different themes sung year by year. Note that there is some overlap, which obviously reflects an overlap in population. This is a spectrograph, a recording electronically portrayed of a quartet of whales. And here are the individual voices of that quartet, each singer apparently totally oblivious and ignoring the other three. What's important to note is that each whale is singing precisely the same song. It's a bit like a barbershop quartet singing Sweet Adeline in 4 different keys and tempos. Why the humpback sings its song is still something even the Paines can't fully answer. But they are now almost certain the song is part of a breeding ritual sung only by the males. It also seems likely that the deep and repetitive sounds are used for communication over long distances. The underwater team was still looking for a better way to approach whales without disturbing them. So they loaded their rebreather apparatus with a chemical that takes the carbon dioxide out of the air a diver exhales. A rebreather recycles the air so that a diver breathes on a closed circuit, making no noise underwater and leaving only a small trail of bubbles behind him. The whales certainly seemed to appreciate the diver's courtesy and allowed them to approach really close. With one whale, they were close enough to film the barnacles on the leading edge of the flipper. The barnacles, a species which only attach themselves to whales, drop off in the warm water of Hawaii. But there is one serious snag to a rebreathing apparatus. A diver using such a device can only safely descend to 30 feet. Below that, he can quickly become dangerously ill. As long as the whales obliged by swimming near the surface like this, the rebreather paid off. The rebreathers produced one of the finest records of all, that of a very pregnant female passing close to camera. Often, though, the whales suddenly decided to dive deeply. On one occasion, Chuck Nicklin followed them down to 60 feet in the excitement of filming, fortunately without serious results. Using rebreathers, they obtained another fine shot of underwater bubbling. Results had been good, but the need to keep to the 30-foot level was proving too limiting. The diving team had one further technique to try out. The divers had found that the whales were most approachable when the team snorkeled at the surface. Now, they combined the snorkeling approach with the use of small air tanks that make far fewer bubbles. One of the earliest successes was this close-up of a very old veteran, covered with barnacle marks and body scars. It may be anything up to 50 years old. Humpbacks probably live as long as we do. If so, it's a very lucky whale, possibly one of the oldest of its kind. The big humpbacks are the ones the harpooners usually seek out first. Most of this one's life would have been lived long before humpbacks were given protection. And even today, they're not entirely safe. Some whaling nations still refuse to honor the ban on humpbacks. It's even possible that's a harpoon scar on its dorsal fin. When whales were spotted by snorkeling at the surface, it proved quite easy when using the small tanks to dive without alarming them. In this way, they obtained some remarkable group portraits, like this one of a mother with small baby swimming with two other adults in close attendance. Like all mammal mothers, humpbacks nurse their babies, and a young calf may grow as much as 100 pounds a day. Remarkably, the mother provides all the nourishment for this growth, even though she's not feeding at all, and will not feed for months to come. While they stealthily stalked the whales, the divers were sometimes stalked by a far more sinister hunter. A big white-tipped shark with a pilot fish seemingly glued to the end of his snout. Sylvia Earle finally sends him about his business. She confessed it had been a bad moment, but added, for the shark. Never once did the diving team feel themselves in any danger from the 40-ton giants. Gentleness was in the humpback's every movement. Gentleness, too, was obvious in the relationship between mother and baby. The little whale touching his mother frequently with his flippers and sometimes appearing almost to hold on to her. Humpbacks are highly social animals, and even adults communicate by touching each other. team had finally found the best diving technique for winning the whale's confidence. This whale swam so close that Al Giddings was knocked back 10 feet by the wash of its tail flukes. There were so many questions that remained unanswered. For instance, who was the third whale who often accompanied mother and child? Was it perhaps the father, or a suitor, or a helpful female, or perhaps an older calf? The third whale again, from a different viewpoint. Note the two dolphins riding on the mother's bow wave and turning away to her port side. So many mysteries of the singing whale had yet to be solved. And yet in the clear waters of Hawaii, some of these mysteries had for the first time been glimpsed, even if not fully understood. Now it was time for the expedition to follow the whales to the icy waters of Alaska, where even more remarkable discoveries were to be successfully recorded. Every year, starting in late March, the humpbacks leave Hawaii. When they next near land, they are thousands of miles away in the North Pacific. They have not eaten for months. Now they must replenish their enormous bodies. As they break their fast, there is another change in behavior. Their mysterious whale song stops. They do not sing on their feeding grounds and will not until they return to Hawaii. They travel slowly at 4 or 5 knots, arching the humpback, after which they are named in a dignified curve. The shape of the back, as well as the slender tail flukes, identify the traveler quite clearly as a humpback whale. Their progress here has been filmed in slow motion, but there's nothing slow about that telltale blow. To change the entire contents of its huge lungs, which it does in 3 or 4 seconds, the air leaves the blowhole at speeds of up to 300 miles per hour. This much is known about the humpback as it travels the oceans. What is still a mystery is where precisely the few remaining breeding populations go. The humpbacks of Hawaii, for instance. This was another one of the problems our expedition hoped to solve. As in years past, the 400 humpbacks who have spent 4 months off Hawaii leave and migrate north. Some are thought to go as far as the Bering Sea. Others frequent the sheltered inland waters off southeast Alaska. Each year, about 20 animals enter the remarkable 50-mile-long inlet called Glacier Bay. It seems likely that some, maybe all of these, have traveled north from Hawaii. Glacier Bay is a beautiful, weird, cold place. The water in it is, not surprisingly, brackish rather than salt. The bay is fed by 12 huge rivers, rivers of ice that flow out of the seemingly endless Alaskan peaks. Those glaciers dump their ice directly into the sea, a process known as calving. With its waters littered with bergs, Glacier Bay looks like a hostile place. But in the short Alaskan spring and summer, which reaches its peak around July the 4th, wildlife finds it quite the opposite. Harbor seals come here to bear their pups on the ice. For water birds, Glacier Bay supplies ideal breeding grounds. Bald eagles nest here. There's seclusion for them and plenty of food. That fierce pirate, the glaucous winged gull, nests here in numbers. When the nesting birds arrive, it's a sure sign that the humpbacks are not far behind, because both birds and whales come here for the same reason. Gulls, guillemots, tufted puffins and thousands of phalaropes. They spotted that the shrimp-like creatures called krill are in the bay. Krill is what the humpbacks feed on. About the same time, another annual visitor arrives. It's a boat called the Ginger. She's manned by the Duras family. This trip, she also carries Dr. Sylvia Earle, recently arrived from Hawaii. Chuck Duras is a marine biologist and school teacher from Alaska's capital, Juneau. With his family and selected research graduates, he spends the whole summer studying the humpbacks of Glacier Bay. Chuck's daughter, Sue, age 14, spots one of the first of the season. Chuck first became involved when he used to fish for crabs in these waters on summer vacations. Then he began to study the glaciers in the bay and their effect on the ecology. From that, it was a short step to studying the most dramatic part of that ecology, the whales. The whole Duras family is as dedicated to whale research as is Chuck himself. Their work, shared by the underwater team from Hawaii this year, has many objectives. One is to try to discover by close observation of individual markings whether any of the humpbacks here in Glacier Bay come from Hawaii. You'd think this was a pretty distinctive face, but all humpbacks look like they've got rivets in their top jaw. The scientists look for distinctive markings on tail flukes and flippers. When the whales first arrive in the cold waters of the bay, the temperature there ranges between 38 and 54 degrees Fahrenheit. They're extremely active. Probably they're simply reacting to new neighbors and to new surroundings. It's difficult not to think of their activities as playfulness. Here, a pair of feeding humpbacks accidentally roll over an iceberg weighing several hundred tons. Some of their more violent reactions most certainly aren't play. To establish the reason for these has a high priority in Chuck Duras's work. Each summer, more and more cruise ships visit Glacier Bay. 8 years ago, there were 20 ships a season. Today, there are 300 to 400. Often when a ship passes, the whales display violently in its wake. Glacier Bay comes under the U.S. National Park Service. The park's authorities are naturally anxious about the effect boat pressure may be having on the whales. Is this awesome flippering a territorial reaction to the cruise liners? Duras feels that the humpbacks may be feeling pressure from the big ships. He points out that this year there are definitely fewer whales in the bay than last year. He's trying to find out if he's right. If the answer is yes, then future boat traffic may have to be limited if the whales are not eventually to disappear. In his own approaches to whales, Chuck could not be more cautious. He feels that, large as it is, the bay can only support so many whales. He sees all large floating visitors as blubber whales, fiberglass whales or steel whales. Here he approaches two dozing blubber whales and a fiberglass whale without causing them to do more than turn over in their sleep. But a passing steel whale has a more drastic effect. The propeller beat of the liner probably caused the sleepers to wake up and, as it were, pull the blankets over their heads. No one wishes to deny visitors the joy of seeing whales. Whales need all the public support they can get, but some limitations on boat traffic may have to be imposed. Often a humpback will breach, leap clean out of the water, apparently in disapproval after a ship passes. Other manifestations include lobtailing, lashing the water with tail flukes. But it will take a lot more study before anyone can be sure whether these displays are caused by boat traffic or whether they're simply reactions to other whales nearby. One of the facts that Roger Payne had established the previous year when working with Chuck Giraz was that the whales do not sing on their feeding grounds in Glacier Bay. But they do have a limited social vocabulary, which an underwater mic records, while the surface microphone captures the often deafening noise of the whales blowing. The social sounds are the low-pitched grunts and whistles. In midsummer, daylight in Glacier Bay lasts 18 hours. And as a result of the extra sunlight, the amount of vegetable plankton blossoms, and the population of krill that eat the plankton explodes. Much of Sylvia Earle's work with Chuck Giraz has concerned this food source. Krill are surprisingly difficult to capture in any numbers. Despite their size, they're fast swimmers and avoid capture only too easily, except when pursued by a whale. It's incredible that a 40-ton creature can sustain itself on such insignificant prey. In fact, the humpbacks are one of the most efficient converters of solar energy into flesh and bone. They're at the top of such a short food chain. Sun produces vegetable plankton. Krill eat plankton, and whales eat krill. They eat an awful lot of krill. In Glacier Bay, individuals often feed for 18 hours without stopping. Trips in the Zodiac gave Sylvia Earle an excellent opportunity of trying to identify whales she'd met underwater a few months before in Hawaii. Unfortunately, this year there seemed to be no old friends present. But then there were only 20 whales in the bay and 400 off Hawaii. She holds out a salinity gauge to catch some of the water from a whale's blow. The vapor in a whale's spout is thought to be caused by external water lying round the blowhole. The salinometer will show whether any portion of these droplets came from inside the whale. The scientists caught most of the spray. For the moment, the experiment was inconclusive. That's a whale feeding on krill right beside the boat. Shortly, we'll see exactly how the whale manages so successfully to scoop up the elusive krill. At every encounter, personal characteristics of each whale are logged. Tail prints are often as distinctive as fingerprints. For identification purposes, every whale in the bay is given a name. That was White Eyes. Everyone aboard the Ginger has a routine. Jenny, Chuck's wife, navigates and is at the wheel most of the time they're observing whales. Since the Ginger is her only home, she runs it like one. On many days, the observers, both family and research students, are on deck recording whale behavior for 12 hours or more. Sarah Hinckley, graduate student from the College of the Atlantic, maps the Ginger's path and that of the whale under observation. The plot for this day, the 8th of July, records every time the animal surfaced. From such painstaking detail will come facts that will help the national parks decide which parts of the bay are crucial to whales and may therefore need protection. At 14, Chuck's daughter Susie is a veteran whale watcher. Her whale log complements the charts made by Sarah Hinckley. Another student works on breathing rates. The graph is a breath print of a humpback. When a humpback is excited, its breathing speeds up like our own. Comparison with the log shows what the cause may have been. As a doctor might recognize a patient by his heartbeat, so individual humpbacks are recognizable by their breathing graphs. So each member of the crew has an area of study which he or she will work on, fair weather or foul, every day, up to 18 hours a day for at least 2 months. Their reward is that they are discovering more than has ever been known before about the behavior of one of the world's largest and most mysterious creatures. A creature that may soon disappear from the face of the earth. The waters of Glacier Bay are not clear enough for underwater photography, but being enclosed, they are usually smooth, except when a 10-ton youngster named Garth decides to breach in the observation area. This surface calm makes the bay ideal for observing the humpback's feeding behavior. The bubbles in the foreground made by Garth's mother Gertrude are part of that fascinating feeding technique, as we'll see shortly. That's a humpback feeding on krill. This technique has been christened lunge feeding. The whale detects a concentration of krill and then lunges through it with its mouth open. Sometimes a pair of whales lunge feed together. The white stripe on the right-hand whale is its tongue. Either side are the baleen plates, or whalebone, which filter out the krill. Often the whale lunges on its side or even its back, so that the weight of its enormous bottom jaw and the water it has scooped up helps close the mouth. There are all sorts of variants on this method of feeding, most of them unimaginably weird to watch. In this spectacular sideways lunge, watch the pleats under the whale's lower jaw open up as hundreds of gallons of water and krill are scooped up. Those pleats, so slick and streamlined normally, ripple like treads on a collapsing tire. It's possible that the whale's tongue plays a large part in squeezing the krill against the baleen filter plates. The small white spots are the barnacles which the humpbacks pick up in these northern waters and shed when they go south. Hanging below, like seaweed, are another species, goose barnacles. The second technique the humpbacks use is called flick feeding. The tail is flick forward, throwing the krill towards that open scoop of a mouth. Again, it only works where krill are particularly concentrated. The tail movement is quite different from the one used when shallow diving like this. There's the flick again. But the most surprising discovery by Chuck Duras in Glacier Bay concerns the third feeding method. This was first reported off Greenland in 1928, but no one believed it. Now Chuck has unraveled its mysteries. It starts with a circle of bubbles. And ends with the whale surfacing nearly vertically with mouth open in the middle of the bubble ring. As it closes its mouth, watch the water being squeezed out, leaving the krill caught by the baleen plates. The really amazing thing is how the whale corrals the krill inside the bubble net. It was Roger Payne who, the previous year, discovered the finer points of bubble netting. The whale swims round in a tight circle but spiraling upwards, so that the last bubbles it blows reach the surface at much the same time as the first ones. The bubble net forces the krill to concentrate at the center where the whale scoops them up. Roger also discovered how the amazing steam engine sound the whale makes as it blows the bubbles seems to concentrate the krill. Just occasionally, the whale gets it all wrong. Perhaps the net isn't to its satisfaction, or maybe the krill isn't dense enough. Whatever the reason, it decides not to feed and comes up horizontally instead of in a vertical feeding position. It makes a shallow dive to try again, often almost immediately. Its top jaw looks like a ship's hatch as it slams down on the krill soup. Every scientist who has studied the humpback is aware of a highly intriguing fact. The humpback whale has a brain over 5 times the size of a man's. Equally important, that brain is formed much along the same lines as our own. It is a highly sophisticated, possibly intellectual brain. With this in mind, can we dare let the last, pitifully few numbers of this wonderful species sink from sight? There is a poignant and improbable postscript to the saga of the singing whale. Not long ago, spaceship Voyager was launched on a journey designed to last thousands of years. One of its functions is to carry Earth sounds to the stars. And one of those Earth sounds is the song of the humpback whale. As it passes the planet Jupiter 2 years after liftoff, Voyager will be hurled out of our solar system and into the stellar void, taking the whale song with it. President Carter described Voyager as a message in a bottle cast on the oceans of space. Such messages are usually cries for help. Alas, help in this case may come too late. It seems sadly typical of modern man that he should be clever enough to put the song up there among the stars, but insensitive enough to obliterate the singer here upon his own planet.